Well, everyone, I'd like to just start out this moment by saying welcome to everyone, and thank you all so much for taking some time out of your morning to come together with me and talk about a topic that is very, very dear to my heart, and that is about presenting an inclusive visual arts experience. As I have probably said before, my name is Marquetta Johnson. I'm a teaching artist with VSA Arts of Georgia. I have been living with a disability for over 20 years, and for that 20 years I've had the wonderful experience of being affiliated with VSA Arts of Georgia, being trained and encouraged and supported by VSA Arts of Georgia in the development of my own artistry as a textile artist and quilter, and of my abilities as a teaching artist, being able to share and to present workshops and experiences for other people to be able to experience creativity. Now you'll see I have my little script with me, you know, just to tell a story to kind of get us in the mood for this. When I was a young child in elementary school, I was a kinesthetic learner. At that time, no one had an understanding of what that was. They just knew that I couldn't be still and that I had a hard time paying attention and listening. So over the course of my school career, I had many, many run-ins with the school law, okay, because it was very difficult for me to sit in one space and focus. So over the course of my elementary school years, my middle school years, my high school years, I struggled with that in a classroom culture where the people that were truly successful and that were truly being recognized by the teacher were the students that could act in an appropriate way in accord with what the school rules were, and the main one being sit down and be quiet. Okay, so as I grew and evolved in my high school career, I had the fortunate opportunity of meeting a teacher that recognized that about me. Now, she never put a label on me or said that I had any kind of syndrome or disorder. She just told me, you could learn better if you're moving. So what she did was taught me some simple ways that I could help myself be a more disciplined and focused learner. One of the ways that she always told me that I could do was to create little note cards when I'm making a presentation, so that I could keep what it is that I'm sharing in line with my brain that's going so fast, okay? I don't want to leave anything out. So this is my special tool that I have today. Now, I'd like to thank my sponsors for giving me an opportunity to share, because I believe inclusive classrooms, inclusive settings, inclusive environments are very, very edifying to students. And for myself as a person that deals with that personal challenge of needing to move so much, having the understanding of inclusivity has gone a long way in helping me to be able to bring out my personal best in what it is that I'm doing as a human being and as a teaching artist as well. I'd like to share with you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. One of the things that is very, very prominent in one of the strategies we'll be talking about is creating a safe and secure environment for the people that we're working with and presenting. And one way people could feel safe is by you telling them what this experience is going to entail. That way they could already establish within themselves, okay, I just have to sit here for this length of time, and the way it looks, I might not have to spell. I might not have to read anything out loud. Maybe I'm just going to be doing stuff with my hands. And so it just makes them feel very secure, just knowing what's going to go on and understanding that I am striving to present in such a way that I'm doing good time management for everybody that's involved. Now, what we're going to be doing today, and you'll find that as I'm sharing, I'm not only going to have this here for you to read, I'm going to strive to share in such a way that it's inclusive. Given the fact that we could have people that are with us that might have sensory disabilities like blindness or hearing impairments, or people that could maybe have learning disabilities that makes it difficult for them to focus on text in this type of way, I'm going to not only be sharing it, I might read some of it just so that we could keep our not only the topic on inclusivity, but that we could experience this in an inclusive way. So the first thing that we're going to be experiencing today will be a movement moment. I'm going to be sharing foundational information with you that points to some of the strategies that I have studied, that I try to fold into my teaching artist practice. Excuse me. I'll be talking about some challenging scenarios that I've experienced as a teaching artist, and maybe through hearing my stories, you might be able to gather some information that could help you if you're in that type of situation as well. And then finally, last but not least, the fun part, I'm going to present and unpack an inclusive art project today. Now, before we get started with any of the theories, any of the academics, I'd like to have a moment just to warm up and sort of get us all on the same page. And what I'm going to be sharing is called Brain Gym. Brain Gym is a series of educational kinesthetic exercises that can be done with participants to help them as far as focus, energy, and concentration is concerned. In addition to me studying Brain Gym, I also am a beginner in studying Tai Chi and Qigong. And what I find is that the Brain Gym exercises have their roots and their base in yoga and many, many other types of exercise programs. And people that are educational researchers have studied Brain Gym and movement in general, and they found that students and, let's just say, people really learn better when they're not only digesting content, but they have an opportunity to move as well. So my little slogan is, give it a little shake, okay? So you might hear me from time to time as we're going through our workshop say, let's just take a moment and give it a little shake. So I might just do this right here. And you know, it's amazing just to have that moment to be able to just, you know, shake from side to side. It kind of gets something moving inside of yourself, your energy, it gets your blood flowing, okay? So Brain Gym information can be found at braingym.com. Now today what I'd like to do is just show you 3 little simple Brain Gym exercises. Now the first principle of Brain Gym is hydration, okay? Hydration is very, very important. The brain, the impulses from the nerves in the brain are electrical currents. Water is the conduit for these currents. So you just think, if you're just drinking sodas, sports drinks, and juice, let me tell you, your body digests those like food, not like water. So water is very important. So in Brain Gym, it's always encouraged that you give children water, that you encourage that they drink. As a matter of fact, you see I put a bottle of water prominently on my table so that we could keep it in mind about hydration. Okay, so let's say we're hydrated, we're happy, our brains are ready to engage. Okay, there are 3 Brain Gym exercises that I want to show you briefly just to kind of get us in the mood. Okay, so the first one that I'd like to show you is called brain buttons. Okay, the premise behind this exercise is that if you get more blood flow to the brain, more oxygenated blood to the brain, it helps the brain to function better. Okay, so with brain buttons, I'm going to demonstrate, and if you want to, you could follow along, or you could just have an opportunity to see me do it. Okay? Now, brain gyms, you're simply going to take one hand and you're going to put it right below your clavicles. Okay? I think that's called your carotid arteries. And you're going to rub those. Simultaneously, you're going to hold your hand over your belly button. And you're just going to give it a little rub. Just give it a little rub in that little divot right there. And so usually I'll encourage my students to maybe just rub that for about 15 seconds just to kind of get it going. And I always tell them, be your best friend. Don't hurt yourself. Don't rub it too hard. Just give it a little rub. Okay, and then after that one, a variation of what you'll find on the Brain Gym site as a hookup. Now, I'm going to show you what a real hookup is. We're not doing that, but I just want you to see what it looks like, okay? Now, they're going to tell you on Brain Gym, cross your ankles. Now, I can't do that. I'm paralyzed with my chest down, but they'll say, cross your ankles, and then they'll say, interlace your hands and bring them through, and you're going to hold them in this position, and you'll put your tongue at the roof of your mouth. And you'll just sit that way for about 15 seconds. What a hookup does is it helps us focus, and it brings our attention inward for a moment, and sort of helps us to be able to gather the energy for a moment of concentration. But the hookup that I show my students, because I'm always trying to get on the level with my students, kind of in a way, you know, and appeal to them. So the hookup I'll show my students would be, it's like we're chilling, okay? But what I'm doing is I'm still making a cross over the center median of my body, which provides the hookup that causes both lobes of my brain to fire at the same time. So I'll just say we be chilling, you know, and we all hooking up, you know, and I'll use this when we're transitioning from activity to activity, just to kind of bring everybody together, because you know what, now this is really deep. I find that when you do movements together, that it helps to synchronize the group. And it like puts us all in that same energy mode. So we're all hooking up, okay? So let's all hook up one time, everybody. Let's hook up and let's chill for a minute. Now, isn't it interesting how we do this position anyway? When we're chilling, when we're focusing, when we're trying to listen to you and really hear you, we might do this, you know. So that's a wonderful little exercise that you could do just for focus. And then the last one that I want to do with you is, oftentimes I'm trying to get my children to get ready for listening. Now, all of these exercises sort of establishes a movement ritual in your classroom, okay? So they know that when we're doing this, we're getting ready to be our most powerful selves. So we've done an exercise to help us to focus. We've done an exercise that'll help us to be able to get our brain, both of our lobes firing off at the same time. So finally I tell them, okay, now the last exercise that we're going to do is going to help us to be able to listen. Okay? And what you're going to simply do is massage your ears. Now, in Chinese medicine, the belief is that every organ of your body has a nerve ending in your ear. So when you receive acupressure and acupuncture, you might find your physician putting the needles all in different places around your ear. And it's amazing how just the touch on your ear does something for your whole body. So I have my children and I'll tell them, let's begin this exercise by rubbing our earlobe. Be your best friend. Don't squeeze, don't hurt. Just give it a gentle tug, a gentle rub. And then let's work our way around our earlobes and then up around our ears. And let's gently unfurl that little curl. And then when we get to that little top, let's give it a nice rub and begin coming back down our ears. Let's just rub it gently. Give it some love, give it some attention, and when we get back down to our earlobes, let's give them a little tug and put our hands in our lap. And let's just feel that for a moment. Just feel the energy that you have brought up to your head. Now we're ready to learn and we're ready to listen. Now, young artists, oftentimes people, oh God, you hear that? I called you young artists. That's what I always call people that I'm working with. Whatever age I'm working with, we're all young artists. Okay, now, oftentimes people will think, oh, I have an inclusive space because I have some grab bars in the toilet in my bathroom. Or I have an inclusive space because I have a ramp and people are able to come in the door. Okay? But inclusion does not just stop with the physical premises that you're sharing in. Inclusion is a way of being. Inclusion is a way of thinking, a way of seeing, a way of preparing, a way of sharing. Okay? So let's say the book definition for inclusion is having students with and without disabilities interacting in activities together to foster awareness, understanding, respect, and co-learning. Now, I put that little co-learning up there. I'm not taking the credit, but I put that little co-learning up there because what happens when you get diverse learners into the same setting, they could feed off of each other's ideas. They could feed off of each other's energies. They could be inspired by each other, okay? And even though a child might not be very verbal, okay, they still are hearing, they are seeing, they are smelling, they are feeling, and just being together in the group really goes a long way in helping someone to be able to grasp a concept. You know, it's almost like, think of starlings. I think those are the birds that when they're flying, they're just flying together and everyone is moving and you're wondering, oh, I don't see a leader bird. How are they doing that? It's because they're feeding off of the energy of the other birds and they're all able to be harmonious and moving together. And that's one of the things that being in an inclusive setting can open up for a student. I wanted to talk a little bit about an inclusive setting, okay? Because like I said, inclusion doesn't mean a ramp and grab bars, okay? Inclusion is much, much more than that. So actually it's more than what I'm sharing. But what I tried to do was to pull out some points that we could begin to think about as a starting place, because you have to get off of zero. when you're starting at the beginning, okay? So you'll see up here at the top on the right-hand corner, I put teacher and assistant, okay? Because when you're given an inclusive experience, the ideal setting would include a teacher and other support people, okay? I'm always amazed, and when I go into the public schools to work with teachers, I'm always bowing and scraping, oh, you teacher goddess, you superhuman, to be dealing with 30 students at a time, striving to address the needs of all of those individuals. And I feel an inclusive setting, even though it might be a lot of work to get that off of the ground, once it's off of the ground, it's just like a hot air balloon. It's just going to float, okay? So we want teachers and assistants. But if you're in a situation where you don't have the luxury of that, you have to be very organized and very on top of your game, extremely, okay? Then other things you might see in an inclusive setting. You might see rigor. And you see I put rigor up at the top because when you're teaching, even though you might have students from the exceptional class, you're not going to teach them about shapes. And then up here with the older kids, talk with them about symmetry and asymmetry. You know, you want to teach to the highest level in what it is that you're sharing. And then it's up to you as that person that had really thought about this to be able to do different things to help facilitate the understanding of everyone that is in there. You will find an inclusive setting offers positive feedback. Now, I don't mean, good job, okay? I mean real-time information that a student, a participant could use to help them to take whatever they're doing to another level. For instance, I have a lot of kids that might be insecure in their creativity because they haven't had a lot of art experiences, right? So they're constantly running up to me saying, you like this? What do you think about this? Okay? So instead of me saying, good job, or that's beautiful, and things like that, I'll tell them, you know what, I find that very interesting. And the thing that is most interesting to me is how you develop that design in the left-hand corner of your work and how it draws your attention to this. Is this the most important aspect of what you're doing? I'm giving them feedback that they actually could use. I'm using art vocabulary. And because I'm demonstrating as I'm saying it, I'm gesturing, I'm moving my hand, it helps them to be able to understand, even if they don't understand the words that I'm saying. Okay? So I'm sharing with them verbally, then I might have text, and I have a demonstration. And so that helps make things accessible for everyone that is involved. Another thing that I love to do is put students in groups because I feel that encourages that co-learning and collaboration, and I just really find that my students really, really need to be supported and encouraged to have those kind of collaborative, kind of community moments around creativity. Then I want to, in an inclusive setting, you see the accommodations for all of the different types of learners and people with different abilities. And one of the main things that I want to say today as far as accommodations would be to have the space set up in such a way that people that have mobility issues could navigate that space and be able to access all of the supplies and access the teacher and to be able to access other students as well. You want to have in an inclusive setting clear measurable goals. You want everyone to know where we're trying to go, how we're going to get there, and have this be something that is not just communicated through words, but maybe even have an agenda that is displayed. Now, what in my teaching, usually I'm not in a classroom that is my own. Usually when I'm doing something, I'm visiting a school or a space. So I've gotten used to making sure that all of these type of things like agendas, visual aids, and things like that, I have those so that I could just quickly put them up so that I could encourage children to feel comfortable with me, because I'm not just taking them on a wild goose chase. They know where we're trying to go, even though they might not know how to get there yet. Okay? Then in an inclusive setting, you're going to have active learning. You're not going to have students just sitting up listening to a talking head. You're going to have students being able to manipulate things. You're going to have students being able to move around the space and to maybe even do things in different areas of the classroom to just keep that movement going. Then finally, we want to consider in an inclusive setting all learning styles. You know, you have children that are kinesthetic learners. You have students that are auditory learners. You have students that learn better when they're having to experience less distractions. You have some students that could get it, and I mean a bomb could be going off around them. But you want to make sure that you consider all learning styles. Now again, for me, I'm not in a situation where I have a classroom. I'm having students that just come to me. So I already am on top of that by having that classroom management idea of encouraging people to lower their voice. Okay? Another thing that I'll do is I'm not yelling. I'm talking in a tone that if you're interested in knowing what I'm saying, you're going to have to be quiet and listen to me. Okay? So these are some of the things that, you know, if you were looking for an inclusive setting, that you would expect to see. Now, now that we have talked about creating the inclusive setting, I wanted to talk a little bit about encouraging the climate, encouraging the mood, getting the foundation for the ideas that we're trying to develop and share. And one way that I find that's really, really effective is by practicing and encouraging in our students habits of mind. Now you notice I say it, practice and encourage, because people learn more from you modeling a behavior more so than you lecturing and talking about that. It's like at the beginning how I was talking about being the thing yourself, having those type of thinking dispositions yourself would encourage that classroom culture, that kind of energy. And even if it's just a one-time experience, you know, to have this kind of intent would go a long way in encouraging these kinds of things in our students. So what I wanted to do was just to bring out a few habits of mind. The educational researchers that are doing work on this have identified actually 16 habits of mind that were you to encourage in your students, that they would be able to have those type of life skills that could help them be great learners in any situation. So I had a few that I wanted to just point out that could be very vital and important. Because see, the thing about it is when you're talking about being the thing, you have to remember that you can't be the whole thing at one time. Okay? You have to gradually let yourself unfold, almost like a flower. Okay? You don't see the center before all the petals have opened, you know. So that's kind of a mindset that I have, you know, of simplicity. It's almost like minimalist living, you know, but being able to make sure that you're going deep by thinking of a part of a thing as you look at its entirety. So one of the main habits of mind that we want to encourage in our students, regardless of their ability or age, would be being persistent, not giving up, having grit, having that kind of inner toughness. Now, I have kids that'll come to me and say, can I start over? I messed up, you know, and I'll tell them, now if they're crying, because see, I'll give in the tears in a moment. If they're crying, I'm going to let them start over, okay? But if they're not, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell them, you know, this is an opportunity for you to think out of the box and figure out how you could make this into something outstanding. Then I'll tell them my stories as a textile artist about how it used to be when I messed up. I would take that piece of fabric, I'd ball it up, I'd run in the kitchen, and I'd put it in a garbage can up underneath everything so that it can't see me. It's almost like I thought this was alive, and I just didn't want to be reminded of my mistake. So I would put it under something. But then I started growing as I come to understand that art materials are expensive. And so I came to an understanding of, okay, maybe if I would work through this, I could work through my design challenge, arrive on the other side with a wonderful outcome. So I'm encouraging them instead of, you know, just having them give in to that feeling. And it's my hope that that could help inspire that little kernel of persistence in them. Then I always encourage my students to listen with empathy and respect to one another. You know, if one person is speaking, let's listen, you know. And I try to encourage that as the classroom culture. You know, like if I hear talking at the other end, I might be quiet and say, out of respect to you, I'm going to be quiet while you're talking. Okay, and then that usually puts them on the spot, and then they'll, you know, pay attention to me, to the queen bee. Then I try to encourage flexible thinking in my students. Okay, don't just see one solution. How do you think that the NASA was able to take a space shuttle to orbit the moon? That was because they had tried, and they had failed, and they had made mistakes, and they had to learn. Lives depended on it, okay? So they worked through, had flexible thinking, and came up with multiple solutions. You know, and that's the kind of mind that really needs to be developed for the 21st century. That flexible mind that could get in that collaborative moment and not be fixed. Be willing to even sacrifice your idea for the benefit of the group and for the benefit of the project. Okay? Then I always try to encourage my students in imagining. Okay? I love that word, and I do it all the time. I'll say, could you imagine if we used paint over crayons? What do you think would happen? And so then that automatically gives them that vision of paint over crayon. Then they might even go back to some of their prior knowledge of crayons are made out of wax. And wax repels water. And so maybe when the paint is over the water, the paint goes over the crayon, it won't stick where the crayon is. I mean, it gives them an opportunity to have a moment of reflection around their own prior knowledge when you're calling them to imagination. Okay? Then Another thing I always try to encourage in my students, because see, I have kids oftentimes when I'm working with middle schools that are not very confident in themselves and in their creativity. And they're very sensitive about other people making jokes about what they're doing or they're saying and whatever. But I often tell them, we're laughing with you. We're not laughing at you. And I'm trying to encourage them to find humor in life. Don't be just such a stick in the mud. Be able to laugh at yourself. Hey, you did something crazy and it was funny, so we laughed. You know, that doesn't mean that we don't respect you as an individual, respect your intelligence, and respect you, you know, and your sharing. Then another type of thinking disposition that I like to try to encourage to develop this inclusive situation is learning through all of the senses. Okay, I've had classes where students had visual impairments, they might have had hearing impairments, they might have had a host of different issues that they were dealing with. But if I shared in such a way that, okay, for instance, I'm sharing about symmetry. Okay, so when I'm sharing about symmetry and balance and design, and I might talk about symmetry, asymmetry, radial designs, I might bring an orange and then cut that orange in half and hold that orange up, and they see that what is on one side is on the other. But they also see that the design emanates from the center, which is a radial design. They could smell the orange. And most likely, I'm going to cut it up and we're going to eat it. So they're learning from smelling, tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, all at the same time. So that learning is going to go deeper and it's going to have more meaning. Then, as I have talked about it probably 2 or 3 times already, is about this idea of co-learning. And being able to learn those types of skills that will help you in a collaboration. The Fortune 500 companies today are looking for people that could collaborate. Being in a family and having to work together and be a good, strong family unit requires being able to collaborate and understanding all the social dynamics that it takes in order to work together. Okay, so co-learning is important, the grouping, the encouraging everyone to be inspired by each other. Okay, now because I'm giving a visual art experience, I tell people we're not in the math class, we're not in the physics class. If your eyes fall over there on their paper, I'm not going to say that you're copying. I'm going to think that you're being inspired by them. And then I talk about inspiration and how co-learning puts you in an environment where you could be inspired by the other person. You might see their idea and you might want to incorporate it in what you do, but then you might come up with an idea to take their idea to the next level, which really, really is not copying. That's really being inspired. And so that's one of the other thinking dispositions that is going to create this atmosphere, this feeling for inclusion. And finally, which I always like to save the best for last, is encouraging children and encouraging participants to look out at the world with wonder and awe. Okay? Let's not just walk by this beautiful sky. Let's take a moment and look at it. Let's see. Can we recognize a dog in that cloud? You know, and that lends itself back to the whole idea of imagining, you know, and being able to be excited about a thing is a definite way to promote engagement in a thing. Okay, so I'm always bringing something interesting, whether it's something from nature, whether it's something from technology, or something that has been created by an artist or manufactured. Just some things that are amazing to engage my students and get them involved from the beginning of a thing. When I'm considering doing my project, I have been trained not to just think about, you know what, it sure would be fun if we did some circular weaving, okay? What I've been trained to do is to always understand that every moment is a teachable moment, that you're working with children. And I always start out thinking about these frameworks as I'm developing the plans that I'm going to implement in my workshop. I think about, and the first thing I think about is understanding by design, which is a curriculum model that encourages you to start with what you want to teach before you start thinking about possible outcomes. Okay? So being that I'm working in a context with students for the most part, my starting place is always with the standards. Okay? I work with Atlanta Public Schools, Fulton County Schools, and I always start with where the teacher wants me to teach from. In my own work, when I might work in a center or a museum, I see that as a teachable moment, and I always try to frame my work in such a way that children are able to learn something from it that's meaningful. I also think about differentiated instruction, which is a strategy that teachers could use to present their work in such a way that all types of learners can access it. Differentiated instruction gives teachers insight as to how to reach out to that individual student, observe them. I guess they also are tested, but I'm really into that power of observation. But being able to observe them and recognize their needs. So when you start talking about differentiated instruction, what you're talking about is a fully actualized teacher. Okay? Then, last but not least, I always think about universal design for learning. Okay? Being that I'm a person that lives with the mobility issue, I'm always sensitive to that as far as my classroom is concerned. But I'm not going to just be working with children that have mobility issues. I'm going to be dealing with students that have mobility issues, that have emotional issues, that have thinking issues, that might be all over the place. So a classroom, an experience, a way of sharing that is well thought out in such a way that it can address the needs of all of the diverse learners that might be in that experience would open the floor so that everyone could have an opportunity to be successful regardless of age or ability. Now, the first one I had mentioned, understanding by design, that is a curriculum model that starts with the standards. And the standards really are just the big ideas that we want students to understand and know. One of the little tricks that I have found to get into a standard, because oftentimes when you're looking at a standard is cloaked in a lot of pedagogy language and technical language that teachers understand a lot, right? So the way that I approach it is I look at that standard and I will underline every verb and I will circle every noun. The verbs tell you what students should be able to do and what students are going to do or need to do in order to capture their understanding. Okay? Then the nouns are going to tell you what the students should know as a result of having that experience. So that's the beginning entry point that I take to any activity. From those standards, I can understand what students need to know, what students need to be able to do, and what students should appreciate after we've had that experience together. The other framework that I use is this differentiated instruction, and it focuses on processes and procedures that ensure effective learning for various students. And it begins with the teacher. It begins with her being willing to open herself up to each student. That's the reason why a 30-student class is really difficult, because a teacher has to make a mental and emotional connection with each student in order to bring out the true potential that is in that student. Making that connection gives you an opportunity maybe to find out something that that student is interested in, something that the student loves, and you might be able to use what they love as a way of engaging them in an activity and drawing them in. So it's very important to be able to share to diverse learners. Another very, very important point of differentiated instruction is knowing that all students don't approach a particular set of knowledge in the same way. Some students might understand that information better if you're telling it to them, or some students might get it better if they're reading it, or they're manipulating something to learn it, or they might even learn it better if you're sharing it in different ways. Maybe you could share it through a video. Maybe you could share it through a website on a computer. Maybe they could do something on a tablet. Maybe they could just have a different way of gaining access to that information other than your face and your mouth. Thinking about that and just different ways that you could share a particular thing is going to increase the engagement and the interest of your students. Now, universal design for learning is a curriculum design. It's a way of setting the tone and prepping and doing things to remove barriers to access for all students. Now, we're not just thinking about students that have some type of physical or mental disability. We're also considering that student that might be considered gifted and talented, whose mind just seems to wander because of the fact that, this is so boring, okay? You're creating this environment, for that child that is very, very, very shy, and that really needs to have certain types of scaffolding and support to be able to function in that social setting in school, or in an experience. So having the opportunity as the educator to observe our students, to be able to have access, which I don't have access to any testing information or anything like that, but to be able to just have that sensitivity that you're able to, just from observing your students and watching them move around in the space, be able to identify different ways that you could make things accessible for them in every area, not just in their physical space, but emotionally and cognitively as well. Thank you all so much for joining us during this second part of our experience together. I'm going to be discussing some of the challenging scenarios that I have had, and then we're going to unpack our wonderful art experience. Now, young artists, and when I'm teaching, I'm usually blessed to have the experience of working with all different types of people, okay? I'm able to work with people with disabilities and people without disabilities. But I find here in the city that I have to take my understandings of trying to develop inclusiveness to a broader range. Not only am I working with students that have different types of challenges, I'm also working with students that have the challenge of English not being their primary language, or students that are coming from other cultures that look at things and that do things in a whole different way than we do here in America. So I thought it would be an interesting thing just to tell you some little anecdotes about some things that I've encountered as far as dealing with those particular scenarios. Now, being that I'm a person with a mobility issue, I'd like to speak first to some of the challenges that I've had with non-ambulatory students. Oftentimes, I will have students come to the museum that use a wheelchair for mobility, or they might use a scooter or an electric powered chair, okay? Or they might even be semi-ambulatory, using a walker or using crutches or using a cane. One of the main things that I would consider would just be my space, you know, because space is very, very important. If you're in a situation where you have a lot of clutter around you, you know, where you have obstacles in the way of your having to move, where you're having to jump up out of your chair and move that chair out of the way so they could get by, those kind of things take away from your flow. Okay, and it also, just as a person that uses a wheelchair, it makes me feel like you're putting me on the spot and everybody's looking at me, you know, and everybody's having to wait and they can't get to the fun because of me, you know. So it just makes a person that uses a wheelchair for mobility kind of feel a little self-conscious if you haven't taken the time already to think about how you can make that work. And one thing that I find really, really amazing and interesting is that for the students that are ambulatory, for you to take the time to consider your space and try to design your space and set your classroom in such a way that you don't have those type of physical impediments, that you don't have a lot of clutter around. Now, I'm not saying beautiful things, inspiring things, interesting things. I'm saying clutter. I'm talking about boxes, I'm talking about stacks of paper. All of those types of things contribute to that feeling of claustrophobia in a room. And so one of the things that I encourage people to think about is just think about your flow. Think about how you could set your classroom up. I mean, even if you just have a one aisle, that's free. But have your classroom set up so that people that are non-ambulatory can access a wonderful working space, that could access all of the supplies and things that are required to participate in the experience. Now, you know what? I would forget one thing. And that one thing I think is important, but I'm going to describe it to you. Another thing that's helpful when you have non-ambulatory people would be if you had lap boards. A lot of us have seen them in studio. It's like a drawing board. It has maybe a little cutout handle right here. It might have a little clipboard up there, little clip up there. Now, I have a lap board that could sit in my lap. It has sliding material on it. It's some kind of plastic that even if I drop beads on it, they won't roll off onto the floor. Those lap boards could be very helpful, because when people are using a electric wheelchair, oftentimes it might be so high that they can't actually take their wheelchair and maybe go comfortably under some of the desks that you might find in educational settings, or even some tables. Okay, because for me, using a manual chair, I'm just able to get under the table. But if you have nice lap boards for people that might need to have something, have a workspace separate from the table because they're not able to access that, having a lap board could really be helpful, just to be able to accommodate a person that might not be able to get all the way up to a table. And even with a scooter, normally what they might do is drive up next to the table and then turn their chair around, but it still might be that they're not able to fully engage or stick their bottom part under a table, so that's always something to consider. Now you'll see I have my water in a prominent position because I want to encourage us for hydration. Okay, now as far as English as a second language is concerned, okay, I'm not seeing that as a disability. I'm seeing that as an educational challenge that you might have. In an art experience, it's a little bit easier to grasp, because I'm not like a math teacher. I don't have to try to get them to understand math, English words. I'm mostly dealing with art materials, which are something that some things that might be universal. You know, children from all different cultures have opportunities to create and make things, right? But one of the things that I have found out is facial expressions are the same regardless of a culture. A mad face is a mad face. A happy face is a happy face. And often when I'm working with children that are having problems maybe understanding what I'm trying to communicate to them, oftentimes I do a lot of smiling and I do a lot of gesturing. It's no shame in that. Now, I don't talk loud, like you're going to understand me more if I speak louder, you know. But what I'll do is I will let my body, my gestures, my facial expressions be a part of how I reach my participants. Another thing that I find very, very helpful would be Art Buddy translators. Now let me define Art Buddy translator. Usually I find when students come to a workshop that do not have a firm grasp on English, it seems as if they naturally gravitate toward a buddy or a friend that can speak English. Okay? So what I'll do from the beginning is I'll reach out to the students that are bilingual and I'll make them a partner in my sharing. Okay? Now, by me giving them that bit of responsibility, I'm already creating some kind of little bond or a little connection with them, because they see that I see them as an expert. Not maybe in this art, but in some kind of way, I am looking at them and seeing them as powerful. And I'm asking for their assistance, okay? So it does something for the person that's actually having to translate, and naturally it's doing something for the person that may not understand all of the vocabulary that I'm using. Another thing that I try to do is I try to have my directions in more than one language. If I'm working with a mixed group, I love to have the English and Spanish, because Spanish would be the language that I most predominantly would work with. So I love to have the main vocabulary words and directions in the other language, let's say Spanish, okay? And another thing, because we're living in the 21st century and we have such wonderful, amazing technology, we have on tablets and computers and telephones translation tools. So, you know, one of the things that we want to do in an inclusive setting, in a differentiated setting, is to bring technology in, because that's an alternative way of sharing information. So to have your pocket translator, your little tablet, where you could, you know, maybe just figure out how to say, we're going to be using colored pencils. And for you to be able to make that effort to try to be able to say it in that person's language makes them feel welcomed. It makes them feel that you're really respecting them and that you want to bring them in the experience as a vital part, not just a fringe observer. You know, so I try to do everything I can to just bring in the English as a second language students right into the middle of what I'm doing by being considerate of language differences. Also, I try to be aware of different cultural differences. Okay, I taught a group of Asian students one time, and it was just a classroom of students that were from China, Korea, and Japan. Okay, and then, you know, with me being American, the first thing that I'm trying to do is I'm getting up in your face. I'm, you know, smiling, I'm grinning, I'm extending my hand, I'm doing all of these types of things. Whereas their culture is a little bit more reserved, and they greet each other through bowing rather than, oh, give me a hug, you know, let's touch, you know. So being considerate of other people's culture and the different expectations that they might have in social settings in their culture could go a long way in creating that inclusive moment. Okay, so now that we have had an opportunity to talk about our challenging scenarios, I want to take this moment and talk a little bit about our art experience that we're going to have an opportunity to unpack. Now, I want to just say this because this is a teachable moment. While I reached over there, I started having what you call a muscle spasm. Oftentimes people that use a wheelchair for mobility, or people that might have had different kind of neurological issues might have muscle spasms. When that happens, oftentimes my leg might go. You know, it was low enough that you didn't hear it. It didn't actually make contact with the table. But oftentimes, other students might see someone having a spasm and might think that they're having a seizure or something, depending on the severity of the muscle spasm. But you could just, what I try to do is just say that that's what's happening, to make other people feel comfortable. And oftentimes as an instructor, you know, you're in a situation where that might happen with another student, rather than leaving it upon that student to say, oh, I'm having a muscle spasm. You know, I might make mention of that just to make people feel a little more comfortable, and I might even make a joke about it or something. Remember, I told you about finding humor? Oftentimes when you try to put a little humor on it, it just makes people feel less intimidated, or like it's not so heavy. You know, it's cool. So now that we've had a chance to go through the foundational information around how I go about establishing an inclusive art experience, I would like us to have a moment together where we unpack one of my experiences that I've shared. And this is going to be an Africa Mass experience. Now, before I have students actually have any hands-on touch with the art supplies, I try to set a tone through giving them a few pointers, giving them a bit of information about what it is that we're going to do, sort of to set the stage for the experience. Now, also, even when I'm not in a school setting sharing, I like to be able to make some type of educational connection with what it is that I would be doing. So with this experience, most likely I'd be sharing this experience with children in a museum setting, in a school setting, in a art center setting, or in some type of organizational setting. And what I like to do is sort of give them visual aids and things to kind of bring them into it. So we're going to be talking about two different things and making connections with two different things. And one of the things that we're going to be making connections with will be African Mass. But also I want to have us have an opportunity to make connections with symmetrical things. Now, when I'm working with students, I might define symmetry as an object that is the same on both sides of a line that comes down the center, just as an easy way to help them see what symmetry is. But then also what I'd like to do is to bring in artwork like this, things from nature, because one of my favorite magazines, Young Artists, is Ranger Rick. And so I have lots of these that I could always refer to things from nature to children so that they could get an opportunity to not only hear the word symmetry, hear and see my definition, but also have an opportunity to either manipulate something or see something that would give them a greater understanding of what symmetry is. So we all know that a butterfly is a perfect example of symmetry. And I would just go through the process of saying that this butterfly is symmetrical. What you see on both sides of his body is the same on both sides. And also, I would love to have things that I can manipulate. Now, the project that we're going to be doing today is also based on symmetry. What we know of as symmetry that we're most connected with would be our bodies, because you have an eye on the right-hand side and an eye on the left-hand side. You have a nostril and a nostril divided by this bridge of your nose. You have two arms divided by the center line of your body. You have two legs. And that gives them an opportunity to not only see your examples, touch your examples, but they have something that's symmetrical right there that I could have them touch your legs. You have two legs, and your legs are the same on both sides. You know, so I try to introduce my activity with actual beads of knowledge that I'm hoping that they'll be able to grasp. Now, young artists, I'm showing you some African masks, which we're going to be inspired by as we develop our art experience. These masks are symmetrical. What you find on the right-hand side, you find on the left-hand side. And you could look at this piece of sculpture. What you find on the right-hand side, you'll find on the left-hand side. So when you go about the process of developing your mass form today, it is my hope that you would think about that idea of concept. I mean, that concept of symmetry, so that you could demonstrate symmetry in the artwork that you're having. When I set up my classroom for my inclusive experience, one of the things that I'd love to have would be directions. Now, these aren't the directions for my experience. I just grabbed a format of direction so you could see it. So let's say I would have my steps, okay? And this would be something that I would have on the wall. So as I'm describing and talking about the experience, I'm going to tell them what we're going to be doing. They're going to see the text that will tell them what we'll be doing. And then I also will follow that up with an actual physical demonstration of what it is that I'm doing before the students begin the process of developing their work of art. I also love to have stuff like this. Now, even though it might be, you know, these wonderful math terms, what I find is when you're building rigor into an activity, you can take that time to have vocabulary on a word wall that might be one step above what it is that we're actually doing. Or it might be that that vocabulary is extending the idea of what we're doing. But it gives you an opportunity to teach to all of the spectrum, not just having everything in the middle, like I'm not going to get too heavy and I'm not going to get too light. I'm going to start out heavy, okay, from the beginning, and then I'm going to facilitate the learning of everyone so that everybody will be able to grasp that by me talking about it, by me demonstrating it, by me giving people examples of it to be able to understand it in a deeper way. So what I'm going to do now is go through the process of unpacking my art experience. And as I had told you before, I love to, have to start with the standards. Okay, now the state standards simply for this experience that I'm sharing would be that students produce artwork in the area of mixed media and crafts. So I know that my project has to be mixed media. It wouldn't do for me to just give them crayons and paper. They need to have a mixture, okay? The students have to demonstrate proper care and safe use of the art materials and the equipment. So I'm not just going to assume that every child knows how to open a bottle of glue. I'm going to take the time to tell them how to open the glue, and to tell them if they have issues to let me know and I'll fix it. Because I've actually had kids to take the whole top off and just pour them some glue because the top was clogged. So to give them an opportunity to have an understanding of all of the equipment and supplies is a part of what the state of Georgia requires that students know how to do. Then finally, it says that students emphasize specific elements of art and principles of design in the creation of artwork. Now that's the big idea. But I know that I can't teach to that in one 45-minute session. So I take a piece out of that. So what we're doing, I'm taking principles of design. Then I have principles of design. I'm going to even go a little deeper, and I'm going to take a little piece out of that. Because I can't teach 9 principles of design in 45 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the little part, balance. And we're going to talk about how artists work to achieve balance in their artwork. They achieve balance in their artwork by focusing on symmetry, asymmetry, and radial designs, okay? And so we're going to go even smaller, and we're just going to be talking about symmetry. So then that's going to allow students to go deep in that idea rather than having this big concept that they're having to try to wrestle with. I'm going to just bring it down. I'm going to have it where it's a smaller concept, and we're able to go really deep. We're able to talk about it. We're able to demonstrate it. We're able to do art around it so that we all, when we leave here, understand what we mean by symmetry. So, the essential questions that I'm hoping students are going to be able to answer when they finish this activity are drawn from my standards. Now, you remember I told you that you could pick out your verbs and your nouns, and that is going to tell you what students need to know and what students need to do, okay? However, you could also use those standards to guide you in developing maybe 2 or 3 essential questions that you want to be answered by this experience, okay? Now, one of the things that I want students to think about and grasp would be, how do artists use color and line to create a mood? So the way that I'm going to introduce that to them wouldn't be that I'm going to give them that sentence, but what I'll do is tell them when they are getting ready to develop their work of art, think of colors that you love. Think of colors that express the idea that you want to express with your mask. If you're making a happy mask, pick happy colors. If you're if you're going to make a mask that is scary and frightening, then think of what colors would make somebody feel scared or frightened. And I always tell them, all art is not beautiful. Okay? Sometimes art can be controversial and in your face. And sometimes art could elicit emotions that you have difficulty in dealing with. But art can do all of those things. It could excite, it could inspire, it could make you feel feelings of anger, frustration. We could get all of that from art, and you could do that by your lines and your colors. So we talk a little bit about lines, straight lines, wavy lines, curvy lines. How do they make you feel? On and on and on. And that sort of helps develop the foundation for them to be able to do this. Now, the materials that I have, I gathered them based on the fact that I'm going to be working with many different types of learners. As far as my papers are concerned, I always try to have papers that might be flat, papers that might be matte, papers that might be shiny, papers that might be textured, okay? And I even love to have papers that might be fuzzy, okay? Because fuzzy is a really, really wonderful place to be. And there are children with certain types of developmental disabilities that really respond to fuzzy. Okay? So I just love to have all of those types of things. So the supplies that I'm going to have for this art experience include fun foam that is matte, textured, and glittered. Because we all love something shiny. Okay? Then I have textured paper that is cut into different shapes. Now, when we're going to be doing this activity, I do have scissors available, but the activity could be done in its entirety without scissors, because the main technique that I'm going to be sharing with children, and I'm going to share this as a technique because what I want to do is create a level playing field in the presentation of my activities. Okay, you might have some children that really have the motor skills to be able to cut exactly what their mind is telling them that they want to cut. Some children might not. However, I find that if you would give people opportunities, give students the opportunities to learn how to tear paper in a interesting way, it sort of takes that feeling away that it has to be perfect. Okay? And I find most of my students have the ability to be able to tear. If I'm dealing with students that might have quadriplegia and they have difficulty in tearing like this, let me free you up with the idea that it is all right to scaffold them and be supportive and maybe even get something started with the ripping, that they could just maybe place a wrist down and be able to continue to tear. Okay? Now, that's not you taking away their artistic joy and you being the helicopter teacher and you doing the artwork for them. That's you helping them to get off zero, kind of giving them a little boost. Because I find oftentimes when you give a child a boost, I don't care what ability level they're at, that little boost could just go a long way in helping them to have that courage that they need to be able to approach this. And then also when you're tearing, you know, you could develop a little skill to your tearing, because you want to learn how to tear straight. You want to learn how to maybe do curved lines or how to do shapes. So that's empowering your students with and without disabilities, and it just levels the playing field. Now, I also have, in addition to pre-cut shapes that people could use without having to use scissors, I have different types of art papers, which I love. Because what I get really excited about art materials, and I know children do, and that's another way to get them engaged. Please use artist grade materials with children. Don't use, no, maybe I shouldn't say it that way. Strive to use artist grade materials with students. It gives excitement, it lends excitement to the activity. You know, when they get around here and they can see, oh man, look, she has glitter paper. Look, she has fuzzy paper. She even has texture paper. It gets people excited as far as developing ideas and things to work with. I like, as I told you, texture paper. I love paper with lots of beautiful colors. I love to offer students metallic papers. And what I'm doing is I'm creating options for engagement. That's one of the principles of universal design for learning. Sharing in such a way that you're appealing to many different learning styles and many different tastes, because people have different tastes and different aesthetics. And it's a wonderful thing to encourage children in that and to use words like aesthetic around them so that they can understand, oh, this is the way that I envision this. You know, this is in accord with my own personal aesthetic, and it doesn't have to be like yours. It could be different. It's my own. I just like black. Okay? So then I have embellishments like sequins, and I have buttons. And with this, what I have is these sequins are very small. So like a person that has normal little pincher skills, they're able to access those. But then you have students that might not be able to really pick things up like that. So then I have really big buttons. I have things in all different sizes and textures that students could use. Now, let's see. Oh, when I'm doing an activity, I try to figure out how can I make this accessible to anybody that might come that day that are doing it. So now these are my little art sticks. In this project, I'm going to be encouraging students to be able to do that technique that artists do called rubbing. So let's say you come and you don't necessarily have that grip. So let me tell you what this is. This is This is what you call rigged up. Okay? I have rigged up a way for a person to be able to rub without having to grip this little bit right here. So what I did was I simply took a piece of cardboard and made it into an M shape. I nestled my crayon in there, and then I taped it in. And it's a little bigger so that people could actually take it and they could do a rubbing simply with this. Now, I have a lot of young people in here, but then I have some people that are my contemporaries that might remember this when I say this. There's a TV program called MacGyver that used to come on. And MacGyver was this fabulous person that was like a crime fighter and all of that. And he could fight crime and he could get himself out of a jam with a gym clip and a piece of tape and things that he found in his environment. So what I want to do, I want to show you some things that could help you be a MacGyver art presenter so that you could say, okay, I have this particular issue. Let me figure out something. Sometimes you might have to figure this out on the spot. So that's why if you always have masking tape and you always have cardboard, you're able to develop things that will help make your art experience accessible. Now, I wanted to show you this. Oftentimes, people that have quadriplegia or cerebral palsy might have issues with holding things. They might not be able to necessarily, hold it like that. So this is a marker that I have taken a piece of paper towel and wrapped it around it. And then I took my trusty masking tape and put that around there so it wouldn't come off. Taped it a little at the end and at the top so it wouldn't slide up and down. And then it gives that person that has those grip issues the ability, my marker's running out, but it gives you the ability to still be able to use a tool like this. Now, with me being a quilter, I might not have mentioned that, but I always have sewing equipment around me. And when I'm sewing, I always have spools that are left over when the thread is gone. You could take a spool and you could put a pencil or a brush inside of it, even a crayon. And then I taped it so that it wouldn't move, so that a person using this could use it to draw and they could still have access to the color pencils just like everyone else. Now, a lot of the planning and prepping for inclusive art experience takes a little thought and a little sweat equity on the part of the person that's developing the activity, but it's amazing when you do this and all of your students can access the experience and your students see how you are practicing compassion by trying to make sure that everyone can join in this wonderful experience together. The students with disabilities will see this, be inspired, be encouraged, and have access. The students that don't have a disability will be encouraged and inspired by the fact that their instructor was sensitive enough to try to make things available for everybody so that everybody could participate. So I wanted to make sure that I showed those to you. Now, I do have scissors because my setting is inclusive. I might have some children. I had a group that I taught, and it was some students in there from Japan. In their culture, they do a lot of paper art. When they saw scissors and paper, even though they could not speak English, they immediately started doing origami. They immediately started folding paper, cutting pieces out of the paper, creating just the most beautiful, intricate collage material that I have ever seen. Okay? So having the scissors here could lead to a lot of wonderful learning experiences, even though my activity is centered around something that is torn. Okay, I want to take a moment to show you all the art experience that I'm going to be sharing and talking about today. This is my inclusive African mask art experience, and you'll see that the main body of the figure is all done with torn paper. And you'll see I'm encouraging children not just to create a symmetrical form, but to use the leftover pieces of paper that they had to recycle and use in their composition to create interest and to not be wasteful. Okay, because art supplies are very expensive, and I usually don't throw away anything unless it's smaller than 2 inches. If it's 2 inches or bigger, I say let's keep that. Okay, so we have in this art experience, we have tearing, we have collaging, we have gluing. And so these are all activities that are very, very accessible to students. Now what I do, I have different types of glue. Okay, I have glue sticks. Some people really love glue sticks, and a lot of this could be done with glue sticks. However, when you're actually gluing on these heavy embellishments, you really want to use tacky glue. Now for my students that have difficulty in putting things on and things staying in place, I even found out about another kind of glue called fast grab tacky glue. Now, what's wonderful about this is it's even thicker than tacky glue, and you could actually glue embellishments onto 2-dimensional work or 3-dimensional work, and it doesn't fall off. Okay, so that makes it such that students that have a low tolerance for things going awry and things going wrong, it makes them feel good because it's going to glue at first glue. If I'm having students that have difficulty in squeezing, oftentimes I'll put a little glue on a plate and encourage them to glue with their hands. And I always keep wet ones, because I'm always going to have some child that does not want to get their hands dirty, that as soon as they finish gluing, they want to go wash their hands. So I'll try to have that available. Okay, so now that I've talked with you about how I'm going to set it all up, I just want to go over a little bit about my lead-in, because I always try to just say a few things to kind of just get us in the mood for this creativity. So in talking about the mask, now you know in America we use masks during Halloween. We wear masks during masquerade balls and things of that nature, but people all around the world use masks. Many people in different cultures use masks as a part of their everyday life, and some people use their masks in different rituals that they might be experiencing in a community way. Masks are used when children are born. Masks are used when young people mature into adulthood. Masks are used for different rituals that have something to do with government or some type of experience where people are getting awards or being commended for particular things. And masks are even used in different kinds of death rituals and things of that nature. Now, the mask that I brought, as a matter of fact, one of the masks that I had, I'll show you later. But one of the masks that I have was used in a funerary ritual. You know, once the person had been interred into the ground, they take the mask and just stick it on the grave. It's like a reliquary figure that people use to honor an ancestor. Okay, so after I've talked a little bit about masks, I like to show them pictures of masks, and I even like to show them actual masks and let them have an opportunity to maybe touch them, to maybe put them up to their face, to take away some of the uncertainty that children might feel about masks from other cultures, because everything is not beautiful. Some things are meant to be a little frightening and unnerving. Okay? And then I go through the process of doing the activity. Now, before I do that, I had told you before how I try to just really prep everything. I try to cut things that are very, very attractive into smaller pieces, so one child won't just take a big hunk and, you know, he's over there with it and then he just used one corner. I'll just go on and cut it in manageable pieces that people could use. Also, cutting the geometric shapes from the beginning. This preparation helps students that might not be able to cut or to be accurate in their cutting to have shapes that they could use. And then I always have paper of different colors, textures, and different qualities like metallic or matte to add a bit of interest and excitement to the project. When I'm working with students, I'm very, very willing to scaffold them. And when I say scaffold them, I mean that I'm there with them and I'm helping them to be able to build their experience, not in an intrusive way, but just like they're with them to help them to be able to have a successful experience. I don't consider this as I'm doing the art for them. I consider I'm their art buddy, and I'm just helping them to sort of get a boost off. Almost as if you were driving a standard shift car and you needed somebody just to get behind you and just push it so you could just put it in gear so that you could drive. Giving children the opportunity to see you support them in that way, I think it goes a long way in helping them to develop a bit of compassion in working with other students that might not have the abilities that they might have. I think us modeling supportive behavior goes a long way in creating that supportive environment in an inclusive setting. Now that I have gone through the materials, the lead-in, and the preparation, I'd like to go through the procedure for doing this. And in addition to me sharing this with you, I would like to have some volunteers from the audience to participate in the art experience with me as I'm talking about it, so that you can have an opportunity to not just hear me say it, but to actually see people demonstrating the process. So I have some people that have so generously said that they will volunteer. Could my volunteers please come and stand at the table for a minute and participate? Okay, now the first part of this experience is that we're going to have the opportunity to do what artists call rubbing. So keeping in mind that we're trying to set a certain tone for our artwork, young artists, let's just put this up under the edge until you do the first step, okay? As I had said before, I want them to try to use color as a way to create a certain mood. I would tell them, think about the mask and imagine the mask that you're going to be creating. Let's pick a color to create our background that will share the mood that you would like to share. I tell them a little bit about how warm colors, which are the yellows, the reds, and the oranges, feel very exciting and make people feel very happy. But then also you have the cool colors like greens and blues and purples that make people feel very relaxed and comfortable. And then you also have black colors that could seem mysterious and really not give people a lot of information about an emotion, but that just gives them something to wonder about. Okay? So I would encourage you all right now to just take some colors and rub them across the surface of your paper by just holding them and just rubbing. And you could use one color or you could use more than one color. Now, as my artists are demonstrating and working on their project, I just want to just give you a few pointers and talk them through it. When I'm working with students, I like to group them in groups of 4 to 5 at a table. They not only have the opportunity to co-learn, but they also have an opportunity to encourage each other and be inspired by each other's, the work that each other would be doing. I also like to encourage students to feel free to use more than one color or more than one design. Think about what is inspiring to you, and most likely it's going to be inspiring to another person. Now, as my students are working on developing their backgrounds, I usually encourage them to just move forward. Don't take so much time to think about the colors. Let your emotions guide you. Pick up what feels good to you and what's inspiring to you. And then, before you know it, I have students that have developed a background. Okay, then young artists, once you have developed your background, then what we want to do is use our textured paper that we have at our space to develop our mass form. Now, I'm going to be tearing a smaller piece of paper to do mine, but you could follow my lead with your piece of paper and be successful. Now, young artists, let's all take our paper, and what we want to do is fold our paper in half lengthwise. We just want to give it a nice little crease lengthwise. Now you see I'm using different types of vocabulary words that are important for students to know. Lengthwise, left and right, up and down, under, over are all vocabulary words that kindergartners through 3rd grade have to master before they could move on. Those type of directional words, okay? So talking about it and demonstrating it gives them an opportunity to come to an understanding of what I mean when I say lengthwise, okay? I'm going to bring them back to the understanding that when you're creating something that's symmetrical, you want it to be the same on both sides of your center line. Now, young artists, what we're going to do is we're going to keep our paper in our fold. And what we're going to do is, starting from the top, we're going to tear our paper in a shape that is pleasing to us. Now, yours doesn't have to look like mine, but you see how I'm tearing my paper and I'm curving my tearing line to create a curved shape. You see, I'm going straight with my tearing on that area that I want it to be straight. And you'll see that I'm also tearing it in a jagged way for the areas that I would like to be different and interesting. Now you see how this young artist used her understanding to figure out how She could tear it in a way that was easy and simple. You saw her put her paper down and hold it with one hand and sort of use the other hand to tear with. It's a good thing, young artists, to figure out ways to make your project work. Okay, so young artists, once you have developed your mass form, then you want to embellish your mass with different types of features. You might want horns on your mask. You might want some type of shapes coming off of your mask. You might want ears for your mask. Okay? So now you have the option of being able to use any of the paper that is in this tray along with your scraps, these shapes, to develop you a wonderful African-inspired mask form. So at this time, I would just have on each table trays of these different types of textured papers and different types of fun foams. And just for this moment, what I'm going to be doing is putting my supplies a little bit closer to my young artists. So as they're working on one part of their experience, they're able to be inspired and imagine what they're going to do next by looking at all of the beautiful colors and the different types of art papers that they have. So now, young artists, let's think back to our mask forms. Our mask forms had eyes. Our mask form had a nose. Our mask form had a mouth. So let's think and imagine how we could use some of this art material that we have to create a face on our mask. So, but before then, why don't we go on and glue our mask down? Okay, so now when I'm sharing, I usually do not have enough glue for every child to have a glue bottle in their hand. So this is an opportunity that I could take to encourage students to share and to be mindful of their partners in art making, and consider everyone as we're using our art materials. Now, once we've glued our mask forms down, then we could imagine how we could make our art even more interesting by adding additional papers, art papers, different geometrical shapes, and we could use this as a teaching moment. If I'm working with children that are from kindergarten to third grade, I'd make reference of these geometric shapes. I might say something to the effect like, gee whiz, that's an equilateral triangle. Okay? And that gives me an opportunity to bring in vocabulary that they might hear in their math experience. Excuse me. And also, it just makes them feel as if you're seeing them as some type of wonderful, intellectually adept young artist, because you're using those nice big words with them.
We do feel smart.
Yes, we feel smart together. Okay? Then, once they've glued their mask down, you see my young artists tearing bits of their paper. They are recycling. They're using those. They're thinking of how they want to use some of these other things in their mask. And by that time, I have brought out my sequins and my buttons. Now, I might tell students at the beginning that I have sequins and buttons, but I might not put them on the table, because if I do, I'm going to have a whole mass of sequins and buttons, because some people like to get right down to it, okay? But what I try to do is encourage them by proximity. I have the things that they are using right then near to them and encourage them to use them. Now, the wonderful little pieces that you have that you're not using, since you're at a table with 4 other students and we're all collaborating and working together, some of your other table mates might be interested in using some of your scraps. So that takes that takes recycling to the 3rd degree, because you're recycling, and then we're going to recycle, and then after you recycle, I'm going to recycle again, because I'm going to keep everything that you have that is bigger than 2 inches and put it in our recycling bin. Now at this time, you'll see that my students have started getting in gear, okay? They have started getting into it. Even this student right here that was saying, I don't know, what am I gonna do? You know, she's getting her little mojo working. She's being inspired by what she's seeing the other students do, because remember, we're co-learning, and she's also being inspired by this lavish array of art supplies that I have placed in front of her. Now, another thing you're going to notice in my preparation, I tried to put things that were similar together. I tried to put things that might have texture together, things that were considered as embellishments together, because what I want to do is, it's almost like presenting a meal when you're cooking. You don't just bring the food in and dump it on the table and throw out a platter. What you do is you try to create a certain kind of ambiance in what you're doing so that the food is even more delicious. And it's the same thing with setting up your tables for your art experience. If you do them in a neat way so that people could actually see what it is that they have available to work with, and they could actually access it without having to rumble under stuff to get it, that neat presentation also encourages creativity in people, because it goes to set the tone for the wonderful time that we're having. Now, young artists are very, very, have a lot of ingenuity. And you will find that people, even though you give them all of the same supplies, people are doing different things. What I like to do is I like to recognize the child that doesn't get very much praise. The child that the teacher is always saying, you come sit by me, or you know, or whatever. I try to acknowledge what those students are doing and give them a moment where they could shine. Because one thing that I find is uncanny, that child that is your biggest challenge is going to be the child that might have some of the most ingenious and creative ideas. You know, so to set the tone where they have multiple options for supplies, multiple options for how they want to manipulate and work with those supplies, encourages everybody to have a successful moment. But to take out that time and give positive feedback to the students that you see that are having difficulty. And sometimes what I'll do is all this glued down yet? Is it glued down? Okay, what I do is I say, oh, look, can you see how this young artist took her piece of paper and created a little spiral so that she could create this nose effect? Isn't that really interesting? And see, other students will be excited by that. Other students will hear me use that word spiral, and they will see how she spiraled the paper. And again, it could just be a way of supporting and sort of reinforcing the art vocabulary that you've been using up to this point.
We have till tomorrow, right? We can do this forever.
You know what? At this point, we're almost finished with our experience. I have a student over here that just has her little face. And she's sitting there looking. She's trying to figure out where she's trying to go, and I'm trying to figure out how I can help her get there. So what I'll do is I'll say, my sweetie, why don't you come with me and let's have an art walk? And I'll take her and I'll walk her around and I'll let her see what everybody is doing. I'll make comments. I'll say, oh, you see how this young artist decided that she was going to use circles for her eyes. Isn't that interesting? And I'll point out a few things that I see other students doing that could be inspiring. And then once they get back to their seat, they have a lot of food for thought that they've gathered just from that art walk. I use the art walk thing not just for students who are stuck on an idea, but I use the art walk thing for those students that rush and finish real fast. I have them, come on, let's go on an art walk and see if we could come up with some ideas for you to take your piece to the next level. Okay? So I could use that art walk for multiple things. And it also gives me an opportunity to make some formative assessment from just observing and looking and seeing what I'm seeing kids doing. I could see if they're holding their scissors correctly, if they're using scissors, or if they're holding their scissors like this, which I do have kids that hold their scissors like that. Usually, I'm not in a situation where I could teach you how to cut, okay? So if I come by you and I see you're cutting like this, I might say, my love, can I be your art buddy? Can I cut that for you? You know, so I'm showing them and I'm modeling cooperative creativity. I'm in support of them so they don't have to sit there and wrestle with this paper, although I'm cutting. Wrestle with this paper and see how they could get it to cut and not use it. And remember also, one of our goals was to teach them an effective, safe way to use art materials. So I'll cut for them, but before that, they'll take their fingers and put them in there and just make them go up and down one time. Okay? In 45 minutes, I cannot build the Coliseum. Okay? But what I'll try to do is just to put down a brick that maybe over the course of your creative lifetime, you could build that Coliseum for yourself. Okay, so my young artists are kind of coming to the end. Usually at this time, nobody wants to put the glue down. Nobody wants to stop. You're right in the middle. You've got your idea, and your idea is born, and you're doing it, and you're all into it, and you don't want to stop. Okay? That's where I have to come in and sort of help bring the energy back down. Okay? So at that time, it's so much going on. I have students that are finished. The students that are finished, I'm encouraging them to pick up their things and to clean up. But also, those children that are finished, sometimes they could be the best art buddies for a child that's still stuck. Now, I don't encourage another child to go and take over another child's artwork. I usually encourage them to maybe be an art buddy. Maybe they could cut some things that the person might need if they're trying to do maybe a mosaic effect and they need a lot of little squares, you know. Or I might encourage them to just sit with that person and sort of be a support if that person needed anything done. You know, like they might need a lot of glue dots put down, and then they are placing it. You know, an art buddy could be helpful in that way, and it could not only help those students that need a little bit of scaffolding, it could also encourage that sense of participation and support in a creative experience, because I like to develop community in a creative experience when I'm working along with students. So now that we've gone through our experience, I'd offer them, would you like to add a bit of bling
Yes, please.
to your experience?
Yes,
Then I would just show them my beads and my buttons and my sequins, and I'd encourage them to use that. Now this is another teaching moment. I'll tell them, young artists, look at the different types of adhesives that we're working with. These kinds of glues are good for working with paper. This kind of glue is perfect for working with embellishments. But what I'll do is, when I have my little bins, because usually I have little bins, I have this glue sitting in there like that. Okay, so when it's time for them to use this glue has come all the way to the bottom. They're not telling me, this glue doesn't work. You know, where's the glue? I have it where it's sitting like that, and it is ready to go right there. Okay? Now, so young artists, would you all like to add just a few embellishments to finish up your materials while I get everyone centered and we could sort of have a moment of closure before we finish our experience?
Yes, please.
Okay, so then while my artists that strive to work to the very last minute, they try to work until the teacher is walking out of the door, and I'm having to click the lights. Click, 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 click. It's time to go. I give them a chance to add just a bit of embellishment to what it is that they do. So I've given students that have visual impairments an opportunity to work with materials that have texture so that they could create diversity in their artwork with texture. I've given students that have issues with their fine motor skills an opportunity to use all kinds of geometric shapes on their art experience because I'm sensitive to the fact that they're still learning how to use scissors. I have a bit of bling to try to draw in the people that love shiny stuff, and then I always pull in the girls with a bit of purple, and especially purple glittery somethings or others. So once I've given this, there are situations where I might need to do some kind of modifications for the people depending on their needs or their abilities. And so one modification that I love to use is to use all different types of recycled materials along with my art materials. It adds visual and actual texture, and it gives students an opportunity to wrap themselves around the idea of not being wasteful and striving to make art with everything. Another modification that I would try to do from time to time is to modify what they're using for a background. Instead of all the time using something that's flat, sometimes you could have them to do their mass form and put it on the side of an oatmeal box. Or they could do their mass form and maybe everybody at that table could glue their mass form to a different side of the box, okay? So that this box is a reflection of the creativity of our group, okay? And then when they get ready to take it home, you could just take your X-Acto blade and cut that box up. And even though it was a collaborative project, they could take it home as an individual once you've cut that up. Now, some of the inclusive practices that I strive to do with this activity, I want to point those out so that we could remember those, would be that I would strive to present my information in multiple formats. Everything wouldn't be just text. I would have text, I would have my voice, and I would demonstrate or I would model the experience. Okay, now at this time, I would like my young artists to just give you just a small little art show of the experience that they've just had. Could I have my young artists in blue? And see, this is a time that I could use to reinforce color understandings and whatever. Could I have my young artist in blue share with us her work of art and say a sentence or a word or a statement about her work?
Sure. This is a water spirit. These are drops of water. This is seaweed. So just felt a need for calm and peace today.
Tony, would you mind?
Sure. The red inspired me to thoughts of war and destruction. And so that's where I went with that.
Oh, young artist, look at how he angled his eyes. Does that give you that feeling of anger, destruction, being mad, being scary? You see how I'm starting to try to use those synonyms to kind of increase the vocabulary around what it is that they're doing. Okay, young artists, would you love to share with us as well?
So when I started, I was going to do it this way. And then I decided that I liked the shape like this better. And then I thought, well, I'll add something to be a mouth. And then it looked more like a mustache. And then he became something totally different. Or Einstein.
Well, young artists, I'd like to thank my young artists for participating. Let's give them an applause. And young artists, you could leave your work here while it's drying, and you'll be able to take this home and share this with your parents. Okay, now some of the other inclusive practices that I tried to use as I would work with students would be that I would try to be the art buddy. I'm not just the teaching artist, I'm not just the one giving instructions and passing out supplies, but I'm your art buddy. I'm having fun with you. I'm creating with you. I'm helping you if you need me. I'm there to get supplies if you need me. So that ability to provide scaffolding and support for your students helps them to have this inclusive experience. Then I try to group my students together like we did so that we could be inspired and support each other. And then finally, I try to make sure that I always have supplies that are accessible to people with sensory, developmental, or mental disabilities. So, young artists, feel free to grab your work. I see your carpool right out there. And thank you so much. So at this time, now that I've gone through the foundational information and we've unpacked the art experience, I'd like to open the floor if there are any questions. If anyone would like to ask a question, make a comment, tell me about your fuzzy teddy bear at home, whatever you'd like to share at this moment. Let's have this as a moment for sharing. For all of you, I'd just like to thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that this has been a fruitful day for you. And I look forward to future experiences. That's a muscle spasm.